February in the Cascades felt like the perfect escape when I sketched out the plan from my Seattle apartment. My sister had recently gotten engaged. My role at the insurance firm was sucking the life out of me, and hitting 34 amid endless cubicle drudgery seemed like a gradual surrender. I wanted to show myself I still had it in me to tackle tough challenges, to rise above endless data sheets and Zoom meetings. The forecast promised sunny weekends ahead, and I'd conquered Snow Peak Trail twice in the warmer seasons. 6 miles up, 6 miles down, no big deal. On Friday evening, I loaded up my equipment, informed my roommate Alicia I'd return Sunday night, and hit the road just before sunrise on Saturday. The parking area at the trailhead sat deserted upon my arrival, a red flag I overlooked, chalking it up to good fortune in claiming the slope solo. Those opening 3 miles delivered precisely the reset I craved. Crisp air stinging my chest, the satisfying crackle of compressed snow beneath my footsteps, and profound quiet broken only by sporadic bird calls. Towering pines flanked the path like icy guardians, their limbs sagging under thick layers of frost. Around 10 a.m., I paused to munch on a granola bar and glance at my phone. No bars, but the downloaded trail map had me covered. Conditions seemed ideal. The heavens held that stunning winter azure, so vivid it nearly stung the eyes. I recall sensing a clarity in my mind unmatched in months, perhaps longer. Snapping a handful of pictures, I tightened my pack's straps and pressed on. By 11, faint clouds began clustering along the western horizon, distant enough to dismiss as no threat. I continued upward. That choice marked my second error, the one that almost ended me. The blizzard struck with unbelievable speed, unlike any weather I'd witnessed. One instant, patchy clouds dotted the view. 40 minutes on, the firmament shifted to a slate-gray pall. The chill plunged abruptly, turning my bare face from chilled to frozen in mere moments. Halting, I tugged on my balaclava and spare mittens, struggling with my backpack's fastener as initial flakes began to whirl. Not the soft, drifting variety from feel-good films, these pelted fiercely, whipped horizontally by a gale that materialized out of thin air. In under a quarter hour, my forward view shrank to 20 feet. The guiding orange blazes on nearby boughs, so reliable earlier, vanished into an opaque blizzard curtain. Fumbling for my phone to consult the offline guide, my gloved hands grew rigid, the display glitching from dampness with errant swipes. Somehow I pinpointed my spot. Roughly 4 miles from the start, possibly 4.5. Retreat was essential, right then. Retreating might sound straightforward in words, but with sight reduced to near zero and all paths blending into sameness, it turned utterly daunting. The route I'd traced lay smothered beneath piling drifts, building quicker than I could react. Attempting to follow my prior tracks, I saw them fading fast, morphing into indistinct indents that might pass for stones, stumps, or wildlife prints. The gusts scrambled my focus, not merely freezing but deafening, a relentless thunder overwhelming all other sounds. Choosing what seemed the correct bearing, I trudged ahead, reminding myself that descending slopes would lead to the highway eventually. That's core backcountry wisdom. Streams descend, paths trace streams, routes link paths. Just breathe steady and persist. Yet after 20 minutes, the terrain tilted skyward once more. I'd veered off course, plunging further into the wilds instead of escaping. and that's when my gaze dropped to the tracks in the snow. Initially, my mind sought a rational explanation. Perhaps I'd looped unknowingly, these being my recent imprints. But they appeared too new, outlines too sharp, and positioned not in my wake, but alongside. Another pair of boot marks, offset about 3 feet left, mirroring my own. I froze, gazing at them. With flakes dumping so relentlessly, impressions ought to soften and vanish in moments. Yet these seemed freshly stamped. Pivoting gradually, I peered into the swirling emptiness astern. Empty, save for flurries, trunks, and that merciless gale. Shouting to inquire if someone lurked nearby, my words emerged faint, devoured by the tempest. Silence answered. Glancing again at the prints, I noted their size edged larger than mine, the sole design distinct, coarser ridges, a chunkier sole. Another person was with me in this wilderness. Music. They had been keeping pace right alongside, silent as a shadow. The logical side of my mind, the one that had saved my skin up to this point, scrambled for reasons. Perhaps a fellow trekker had been trapped by the blizzard as well. Maybe they were disoriented like I was, had found my trail, and chosen to stick to it. That made sense, really. Pairing up doubles your odds of pulling through. Yet if so, why no shout? No attempt to connect? Why linger just beyond view, sinking their stride to mine? Near enough to drop prints next to mine, yet always too far to glimpse. I picked up my pace, hurrying onward, and every few strides I forced myself to glance downward. There appeared the prints, mirroring my steps, left, right, aligned flawlessly with my own. Music. This individual wasn't lagging or forging ahead. They held steady, mirroring my every motion, halting when I did. To test it, I froze once with my right boot suspended, and I could have sworn a soft crackle echoed in the drifts to my side, as if another had halted identically. Then silence, save for the gale. I set my foot down and pressed on, the prince resuming its place as though uninterrupted. No clue how much time passed in that haze. When chill and terror grip you that hard, minutes blur into hours, 30, maybe 2 full ones. The flakes music poured relentlessly, the gusts howled on, and those impressions materialized beside mine with eerie regularity. Eventually, I saw it. They weren't merely even anymore. They curved gently inward, bit by bit, nudging my route westward. It had snuck up on me, but pausing to check my phone's compass revealed the shift. I was veering northwest, not south, plunging deeper into remote terrain, away from any trailhead. Music. This stalker wasn't merely trailing, they were steering me astray. Rage flared through the dread, sharp and fierce. No way was I perishing in this hell because some twisted soul wanted their fun. I halted deliberately, forcing clarity amid the chaos. Gusts blew from the west, so keeping them brushing my right jaw would point me south. Basic navigation. I recalibrated and resumed, purposeful now, eyes averted from the snow. I refused to let those marks dictate my way. But they adapted. No longer flanking, they crossed ahead, slicing my line at angles that demanded I leap them or swerve leftward. Each adjustment I made, fresh ones bloomed forward, obstructing, herding me off. It felt like navigating a labyrinth assembling itself around me on the fly. I froze once more, then bellowed into the tempest, a guttural, voiceless roar that clawed my voice raw. I challenged the hidden figure to reveal themselves, branded them spineless. Ugly words spilled out, frantic pleas, raw bargains. The storm devoured them all, but music briefly, the veil of white parted, granting a view perhaps 50 feet out. Between twin pines loomed a silhouette, tall, cloaked in shadow, utterly still. No features visible, just the form, hooded head, limbs limp. We faced off, or so I sensed, then flakes surged back, erasing them. That glimpse shattered something in me. Not bravery, I'd long since lost that. But the numb dread coiling in my core solidified. Spotting that solid human form observing me made it undeniable. This wasn't delusion, not Frostbite's illusions. A real presence shared this void, and their intent wasn't rescue. Music. It ran darker. I fished the bear spray from my coat, my standard hike companion, slim odds but better than none. Gripping it right-handed, thumb poised, I advanced swiftly, short of a sprint. Trudging through powder like this borders on futile regardless. Music. Energy mattered more. My thighs screamed, my chest heaved in agony. Wind stayed my guide on the right, and I banned glances at the earth. No more princes, no tracking their proximity. Just relentless steps, tallying them silently to stifle the panic. Around 300 counts in, the woods thinned, and I teetered on a chasm's brink. Instinct yanked me back, snagging a limb that raked my palm raw beneath the mitt. A 40-foot plunge yawned below, jagged and sheer, cradling a iced-over stream that shimmered faintly amid the drifts. My pulse hammered in my chest so fiercely that it vibrated through my jaw. I scanned left and right, searching for any path to bypass it. The chasm extended endlessly in either direction, visibility limited but sufficient to confirm I couldn't simply skirt around it in short order. This spot was exactly where they'd been hurting me. It marked the impasse. I whirled back, bracing for that shadowy silhouette to rise from the blank expanse, yet behind me lay only drifts of powder and utter quiet. The tracks were unmistakable, though, a series of them snaking straight to my position, halting roughly 10 feet short. Pristine, defined, deliberate. This individual had lured me here intentionally, and now they lurked, eager to observe my next move. In that instant, I chose a course that likely preserved my existence. Rather than succumbing to frenzy or attempting to navigate the ravine's rim through treacherous, powdery drifts with unreliable traction, I opted for the unforeseen tactic. I descended. To my right, the incline gentled into a steep but manageable grade, lacking the vertical plunge, riddled with icy boulders and protruding roots. I tucked the bear spray into my pocket, pivoted to face the descent, and began lowering myself rearward, clutching at anything solid. The stones gleamed with frost, and my mittens hindered a firm grasp. On 2 occasions, my boot lost purchase, sending me skidding a few feet before I regained control. My coat grated against the rock, my heartbeat jammed high in my neck. Still, I pressed on. Midway through the drop, a noise echoed from overhead. Not the gale's howl, but something crisper, the crunch of footwear compacting the frost, approaching the brink with urgency. I avoided glancing upward. Instead, I accelerated, limbs quivering from exertion, digits frozen despite their coverings. Upon hitting the base, I thudded onto the iced-over stream, sensing the surface fracture under my soles, though it bore my weight. I lurched upright and peered toward the rim. A silhouette loomed there, gazing downward. The flurry had eased slightly, revealing details for the initial time. A male, by his physique, wide build, imposing height, clad in that familiar shadowed parka. He remained motionless, arms hanging loosely, fixed on my form. His features hid under the cowl, but his stare pressed upon me like an oppressive force. We held still for an extended beat. Then he retreated a single pace from the lip and melted into the haze. I trembled in place, anticipating his return from another angle or a descent by alternate means. Yet time ticked by without incident. The blizzard howled on high, but the gully's barriers shielded it below, granting me, after hours, a chance to gather my thoughts. With unsteady hands, I retrieved my cell. No bars yet. The compass functioned, however, and I recalled that streams descend toward lower ground, toward settlements. I set off alongside the solidified flow, tracing its meandering route through the defile. I didn't pause until the sides narrowed, the foliage sparse, and far off, a dull stripe of pavement sliced the white. A utility vehicle spotted me tottering on the verge some 20 minutes afterward. Behind the wheel sat Earl, an elderly fellow from the local highway upkeep unit. He remarked that I resembled a specter upon stopping, ashen, quaking, and struggling to speak coherently. He draped me in a coverlet from his cargo area and blasted the cab's warmth to maximum while I huddled in the front and wept. I attempted to recount the events, the imprints, the pursuer, the gulch, but chills rattled my frame, mangling my speech into fragments. He simply acknowledged and ferried me directly to the park headquarters at the foothill. The officials documented my account, offered steaming brew, and summoned the recovery squad. Come dawn, post-blizzard, a group ascended. They traced my path diverging from the primary route, the spot of my plunge into the gorge, the iced waterway guiding me to safety, yet uncovered no additional traces. The fresh powder had buried all, or perhaps none existed to uncover. I'm uncertain. Later, the officer who debriefed me suggested possible light frostbite effects, noting how chill can spark visions, suspicion, and disorientation. She delivered it softly, aiming for compassion. I agreed politely and expressed gratitude without protest. Yet I recognize what transpired. I recognize the sounds. I recognize those marks as authentic, having witnessed them materialize alongside my own, stride for stride, over what seemed an eternity. I recognize that presence as genuine, having beheld him poised at the precipice, observing, anticipating. Upon returning to Seattle, I reported the incident to the police, and they promised to investigate, but it led nowhere. There were no witnesses, no clues, no leads. It was just one more baffling event in the remote wilderness with no answers. I've steered clear of Snow Peak Trail ever since. That experience ended my solo hikes, and I doubt I'll ever resume them. Even now, on windy nights, when gusts rattle my apartment window, my mind drifts back to that shadowy form amid the blizzard. I ponder what might have unfolded if I'd descended into that gully. I wonder about his intentions, luring me deeper, and the horrors that could have awaited if I'd gone along. And it haunts me that, Out in those woods, perhaps at this very moment, he's lurking among the pines at some deserted trailhead, eyes fixed on a vehicle rolling into the lot, on another solo female hiker tying her laces, glancing at her phone, and vanishing into the snowy expanse, utterly unaware of his presence. Working the graveyard shift at a round-the-clock laundromat uncovers truths about folks that the sunlit hours keep hidden. The ordeal I faced that February Thursday in 2018 still has me double-checking the doors before I take my post at the counter. By then, I'd been at Sudsy's Coin Wash on Belmont Road in Columbus, Ohio, for roughly 8 months, a job I grabbed after quitting community college the previous spring when covering rent-trumped chasing grades. It was a basic setup: 12 heavy-duty washers, 8 dryers, buzzing fluorescent bulbs like swarming bees, and a cramped back office where I killed time streaming shows on my phone and troubleshooting stuck appliances for the rare visitor. My hours spanned 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., with only a handful of customers on a typical night, maybe 4 or 5 at most. That evening, the forecast had flagged a polar vortex dropping temps to minus 15 degrees. The sort of freeze that claims lives on the streets and snaps batteries like twigs. By 2 a.m., the place was deserted. Outside, the gale battered the big front windows so fiercely I braced for them to burst. I'd just wrapped up wiping down the area by the folding stations when I spotted a woman at the entrance, face smooshed against the glass, her exhales forming fleeting frost patches in the savage chill. Her jacket was flimsy, useless against the cold, and she had no mittens. Her fingertips looked raw, edging toward blue, and she shook uncontrollably. I could see it from inside. She locked eyes with me, gave a feeble wave, and gestured toward the lock. The rules were straightforward. Post-midnight, everything locked tight, buzz in to enter. But seeing her, late 40s I'd guess, with damp gray-streaked hair stuck to her brow and raw need etched across her features, I couldn't just leave her to the elements. I approached and flipped the latch. She stumbled in, trailing a blast of icy wind that stole my breath. Her thanks came out faint, fractured like thin ice, splintering. She introduced herself as Renee, explaining her vehicle had stalled about a mile away. She'd trudged here seeking any lit spot with warmth. Battery on her phone was kaput. She flashed the dark display to prove it, saying she only needed to thaw out and ring her brother for a ride. It checked out completely. I directed her to a hard plastic seat by the dryers, the coziest nook thanks to lingering warmth, and handed over my half-drunk coffee, which she took with quivering fingers. As she clutched that foam cup, I was glad I'd bent the rules. This was simple kindness. No one should perish from the cold over some corporate memo from desk jockeys who'd never pulled an all-nighter. The following 20 minutes passed peacefully. Renee perched there, nursing the brew, her skin gradually pinking up in her face and hands. She inquired about borrowing the office line for her brother, and I agreed without hesitation, guiding her there. The room was tiny, more storage than space, holding a steel desk, a swivel seat, a floor-anchored safe for the quarters, and an ancient landline straight out of the Stone Age. She punched in digits, exchanged a few words with a guy on the line. I caught the timbre but not the talk, then clicked off. Her sibling was en route, she assured me, about half an hour away. She expressed her thanks once more, and as she did, I caught her gaze drifting lazily around the office, scanning the safe, the desk drawers, and the little security screen displaying fuzzy video from the main area below. Back then, it didn't register with me at all. I figured she was just nosy, restless, or maybe still foggy from the freezing temperatures. I escorted her back to the seat by the dryers and resumed my position at the counter. Roughly 15 minutes passed before the buzzer sounded. I checked the monitor and spotted a guy waiting outside, his hands buried in his coat pockets, shoulders drawn up against the gusts. He stood tall, around 6 feet 3 or 4, bald-headed with a bushy beard dusted in ice. I pegged him as the brother showing up quicker than anticipated. I shot a look at Renee, who was on her feet and heading for the door without missing a beat. Yet there was an odd vibe to her stride that snagged my notice. She didn't look startled or glad, like you'd imagine for someone whose rescue has finally arrived amid the brutal chill. Her steps were steady, nonchalant even, and her focus stayed locked on me instead of the figure beyond the glass. I hit the button to release the lock, and he came in, thudding his boots on the mat and rubbing his hands together for warmth. He gave me a brief chin tilt in acknowledgement. Nothing more. No thanks. No hello. He bypassed the counter entirely and positioned himself beside Renee by the dryers, where they murmured in tones too hushed for me to catch. I attempted to dive back into my phone, flicking through feeds without absorbing a thing, but concentration eluded me. The interplay between them was knotting my stomach, stirring faint chills of discomfort along my back. They didn't come across as family. No embrace, no sigh of gratitude, no "thank goodness you're here" exchange. They huddled side by side, heads inclined like plotters in a scheme. Every so often, one would flick a glance my way. Swift, sneaky peeks they likely assumed slipped past me. He'd kept his coat on, hadn't taken a seat, hadn't settled in like someone planning to linger. He balanced evenly on his feet, stance stiff, poised for a rapid exit if required. My mind raced with possible reasons. Perhaps their bond was messy, or he resented trekking out in this storm, or I was overthinking it all at 3 a.m. after hours of solitude. Still, none of those eased the persistent warnings humming at the edge of my thoughts. The man pulled away from Renee and approached the counter. His boots, sturdy ones with steel caps, thumped heavily on the linoleum, each footfall resounding like a deliberate rhythm. He halted opposite me, near enough for the scent of cigarettes to hit, mingled with a sharper tang of stale perspiration. This close, his eyes struck me as a washed-out gray, devoid of any spark. He inquired about a restroom I might let him use. I confirmed there was one, gesturing to the brief corridor leading to the facilities at the rear. But he didn't head that way. Leaning into the counter on beefy forearms, he instead probed whether the bathroom sat close to the office he'd glimpsed upon entering. My throat constricted. His phrasing "that office" underscored how he'd been observing keenly, mapping the space from the instant he crossed the threshold. I clarified that the restroom was to the left, the office to the right, and it remained secured. A faint smile tugged at his mouth then, failing to light those vacant gray eyes, before he pivoted and proceeded down the hall. The moment he vanished from sight, Renee materialized at the counter, as if timed to the second. She bent in too near for ease, revealing a thin scar slicing her left brow that I'd overlooked earlier. She queried whether I was working solo that night. The words landed like a splash of frigid water. I fibbed on the spot, claiming my manager was handling stock checks in the rear and due out shortly. A shadow crossed her features, irritation perhaps or a quick mental pivot, and she peered down the corridor he'd taken. Pressing further, her tone stayed cordial, but carried a sharper undercurrent. She wondered when my shift wrapped and if a replacement was incoming to take over. I replied 7, adding that my colleague was reliably punctual. I fed her every fabrication that came to mind, trying to downplay how remote this laundromat really felt. She absorbed it all with a deliberate nod before heading back to the dryers, silent as ever. My pulse thundered in my ears, a relentless drumbeat. These folks weren't random drop-ins. They weren't lost motorists hoping for a lift. No, they had a deliberate agenda here, and I was piecing together just what that purpose entailed. The guy emerged from the corridor again, bypassing Renee's spot entirely. He headed straight for the office door and jiggled the knob outright. No cover story, no small talk. He twisted it a couple times, then fixed those dull gray eyes on me and claimed he needed inside because he'd forgotten his cell there during his sister's earlier call. The excuse was laughably obvious, bordering on offensive. I shut him down flat. Insisted the office was always secured, key only with the day shift supervisor. Pure invention on my part. The ring was right there in my pocket all evening, but I sold it with every ounce of resolve I had. He locked gazes with me for an endless beat, his jaw clenching, veins standing out under the scruff. Then he pivoted and rejoined Renee for a hushed exchange. Seizing the chance, I fished out my phone, shielding it under the counter from their view. My grip shook as I keyed in the digits, thumbs slipping across the display. I dialed the nearby station's routine line, not emergency services since I wasn't sure this hit that threshold yet, but the contact I'd stashed after some inebriated patron once vowed to smash our glass. I kept watch on the pair while it connected, noting the man circling back to the office. Now he skipped the knob, bracing his shoulder against the panel and shoving, the frame creaking in protest. Renee had risen too, lingering by the main exit, and a nauseating realization hit. She was cutting off my escape route. The call connected, a dispatcher's weary tone cutting through. I murmured my spot, described the duo attempting to force the rear office, admitted I was solo and terrified. She urged me to hold the line, said units were en route, advised keeping cool and avoiding any showdown. That final bit nearly drew a bitter chuckle. Clashing with them was the last thing on my agenda. Survival through the coming stretch until backup showed. That was all I craved. The man bashed the door once more with more force, and a splintering snap echoed from the jam. Renee's gaze whipped to the noise, then swung to me. Our stares locked amid the harsh glow of the overheads. She had to sense I'd summoned help. Her features, icy and scheming, stripped away the frantic act she'd nailed so well before, signaling things were escalating rapidly. Renee snapped a curt word at him, too muffled to catch, and he halted his assault. Tension hung thick for a suspended instant. The hum of the lights, the far-off gusts battering the panes, the dispatcher's ongoing chatter in my ear, all blurred into white noise as they paused, seemingly torn. Then he dipped a hand into his jacket, and terror seized me solid. Except it wasn't a gun or blade, just his cell. He glanced at it, muttered to Renee, and her expletive carried sharp across the space. Sirens pierced the gale, soft initially, then swelling steadily. He pocketed the device and strode to the entrance, not sprinting but driven, soles thudding hard. Renee trailed close, halting briefly to appraise me once more. No fury, no irritation at the interruption, just a neutral scan, as if committing my features to memory. She shoved out into the icy void beyond. Cops rolled up roughly 3 minutes after, a pair of squad cars, strobes flashing azure and crimson over the blanketed lot. My fingers quivered as I buzzed them through, recounting the full ordeal. They combed the grounds but turned up zilch on Renee or her companion. No ditched vehicle down the highway as she'd spun, no tracks in the drifts pointing anywhere telling. The gale had already swept clean any path they'd taken. The cops logged my account, inspected the splintered office entry. The door frame was split almost clean through, and another solid blow would have shattered it entirely, confirming that I'd made the smart call by dialing the authorities when I did. A female officer with cropped silver hair and a composed, even tone mentioned that this wasn't their initial encounter with such a scheme. They operate in pairs, she noted. One posing as the distressed individual to secure access, the other arriving shortly after to handle the real work. Their focus is on remote shops amid harsh conditions, banking on the chill to erode caution and stir compassion. She called me fortunate, warning that the outcome could have been far grimmer. I recognized the truth in her words. Yet that didn't halt the tremors or erase the haunting expression on Renee's face from my thoughts. I left that position just 2 weeks on, handing in my resignation the following morning as my boss walked in, spotting the fractured jam, the official incident log on the desk, and me huddled in the back with an untouched mug of coffee gone frigid over hours. He got it immediately, admitting he'd have acted likewise. Afterward, I landed a gig at a distribution center, sticking to daylight hours amid fellow employees, machinery, and constant clamor, a setup where solitude was impossible. It's been 6 years since, and that evening lingers in my mind more than I'd care to confess. Whenever the mercury plunges under freezing, or I catch a broadcast about folks perishing from exposure, or a knock echoes at the door after dark, I'm transported back to that coin-operated wash house, witnessing Renee smoosh her features to the pane with those bluish digits and an act of utter need that duped me utterly. I don't fault myself for granting her entry. Plenty of others might have responded identically to a woman in the grips of frost, pleading for aid in the dead of night. Yet that February Thursday imparted a lesson I've carried ever since. Compassion can unlock barriers. And certain individuals dedicate their existence to finding those ready to turn the key. My drive back from the distribution center typically clocks in around 40 minutes, though on that January 2023 evening, slick roads stretched it to nearly 60 due to the freeze. I'd hit 34 just 7 days prior, and my spouse kept urging me to seek employment nearer our place, anything avoiding those late-night hauls over unplowed country lanes. She had a point, as she often does. Still, the salary suited us fine, especially with our new home purchase, so I persisted with those 5 weekly treks along neglected rural paths come winter. On that specific Wednesday, the air hovered near 15 degrees. My Ford's vents waging a futile war against the draft infiltrating the glass. Exhaustion weighed on me heavily, the sort that seeps into your marrow after a full 10-hour shift shifting cargo. My sole desire was reaching our place, embracing my partner, and tumbling into sleep. Roughly 20 minutes from the house, navigating a segment flanked by abandoned fields and thick forest stands, a silhouette emerged roadside. Initially, my beams tricked me into seeing a deer, the form materializing abruptly. Then limbs flailed, revealing a human, a lady perhaps in her 40s, clad in a flimsy black jacket ill-suited for the bite. She hovered by an aged Chevy with its bonnet raised, signaling desperately with both arms as if survival hinged on it. Raised in a tight-knit community, my folks instilled in me the value of aiding those in distress. Out there, with 0 signal bars and temps lethal within hours, abandoning a motorist wasn't an option. Thus I eased to a stop some 30 feet beyond her vehicle and activated my flashers. I paused briefly, eyeing her approach in the mirror as she hurried to my rig. A knot formed in my stomach, but I dismissed it as needless worry. She reached the side door and I lowered the glass part way. The chill slapped me at once, fierce and raw. Closer inspection showed her as less aged than assumed, likely early 30s, with raven locks tied in a disheveled tail. Her cheeks glowed ruddy from the wind, body quaking violently, teeth clacking as words escaped. She explained the breakdown hit about 60 minutes earlier, leaving her awaiting any passer-by. Her cell was out of juice, and she required transport to her siblings nearby, gesturing loosely into the shadowed stretch beyond my illumination. I offered to inspect the engine, perhaps provide a boost, but she declined briskly, insisting it was hopeless. The motor had faltered repeatedly lately and now quit for keeps. Her tone, sharp and offhand, caused me to hesitate, yet her shivers seemed real, her need urgent, and I simply couldn't abandon her in the freezing night. I popped the locks and waved her inside. She climbed into the seat beside me and thrust her palms toward the vents, chafing them briskly. A whiff of smoke clung to her, mixed with a tangy odor I couldn't pinpoint. I inquired about her brother's precise address, and she pointed us away from the highway onto an unfamiliar side path. I was familiar with the region and aware of isolated homes dotted along there. Aging structures with winding lanes concealed by foliage, so it didn't strike me as unlikely. Still, as we veered onto this tighter lane, the asphalt deteriorated right away. Ice blanketed the surface in spots. No fresh tracks marred the snow ahead. Nothing indicated recent passage by any vehicle. Dense forest hemmed us in, limbs drooping to claw at my pickup's sides as we advanced. I eased off to around 20 miles per hour since visibility was poor. The beams from my lights vanished into the blackness up front. That's when she urged me onward, claiming it wasn't much longer. Her inflection shifted. No trace of panic now, just steady and emotionless. I stole a look her way. She avoided my gaze. Her stare fixed forward, palms idle on her legs instead of seeking heat. The tremors had ceased as well, which puzzled me. The cab's warmth was barely adequate, and she'd been chilled to the bone moments earlier. I probed casually about the remaining distance, but she merely replied, quote one. Nothing more. No cues, no signs to spot. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. I'd begun calculating our drift from the primary route, perhaps 2 miles, possibly farther. No dwellings had appeared, no glows piercing the woods, only gloom and frost. And this stranger beside me, who no longer resembled the vulnerable figure I'd rescued. My mind wandered to my spouse back home, likely dozing unaware of my whereabouts. I pondered how isolation would swallow any trace of me if trouble struck. That realization clenched my throat. Then, a sight jolted me rigid. Off to the left, roughly 50 feet up, a silhouette loomed at the tree line, motionless and observant as we approached. A male form, judging by the outline, clad in shadowy garb that merged with the night. The glow from my lamps snagged on a glint from his coat, perhaps metal trim. I stayed silent, pressing on while scanning the mirrors and pavement. Soon another emerged on the right, set deeper in, but unmistakable. Yet another watcher amid the trunks, oriented toward us. My pulse thundered in my head. I eyed the woman. Her features remained vacant, as if anticipating an event. In that instant, I realized I'd steered into a deliberate snare, and escape was urgent before it snapped shut. Instinct overrode thought. I stomped the pedal, and the rig slid across the slick, whipping sideways briefly until I steadied it. She clutched the dash and turned to me at last, but her look held no shock or alarm, only fury, icy and raw, as if I'd sabotaged her scheme. Her lips parted for words, yet I was already shifting into reverse. I floored it, the vehicle bucking back as the wheels fought for grip. She lunged for my sleeve, nails biting through the fabric, demanding I halt, insisting I'd erred. But her timbre was altered, insistent and grating, far from the frail hitchhiker's plea. I flung her hand away and persisted in backing up, glancing rearward to hold the path. Twigs raked the bodywork like grasping claws. Motion flickered at the edges of my sight, forms stirring in the underbrush, drawing near. She clawed at the wheel next, then scrambled over the divide. I elbowed her aside more forcefully than intended, and she thudded against her door with a gasp. Briefly, our stares locked, revealing emptiness. No flicker of empathy or regret, merely irritation at her setup unraveling. I stretched over, seized the latch, and flung the panel wide while wrestling the controls one-handed. Icy wind barreled through, and she anchored to the cushion, now hurling curses unfit to echo. With a final thrust, I ejected her. She spilled onto the frozen ground, vanishing into the murk. I didn't stick around to check on her condition. Instead, I slammed the door closed and backed up steadily until I spotted an opening broad enough to swing the vehicle around. All the while, my beams lit up shadowy shapes slipping out from the tree line. 3 or 4 of them sprinting straight for the pickup. They were way too near for comfort. Still, I managed the turnaround and punched the accelerator, the motor thundering while the wheels scrambled for grip on the frozen surface. I refused to glance behind. Eyes fixed on the slim path in front, foot glued to the pedal, I silently hoped to avoid skidding into a ravine or smashing into a trunk. The wheel bucked wildly with each icy bump, yet I gripped it firmly and pressed on. It seemed an eternity until the primary highway appeared, that well-known ribbon of blacktop leading back to safety. As my rubber met firm tarmac once more, a weird noise escaped me, part chuckle, part cry. Tremors racked my frame, not due to the chill, but the rush of hormones surging inside. I sped home far beyond the limit, glancing repeatedly at the rear view for any pursuing lights, half bracing for that vintage Chevrolet to appear. Nothing showed, only vacant stretch and night. Pulling into the garage, I idled there for ages, motor humming, struggling to steady myself before heading in and alarming my spouse. That evening, I held back the details. Impossible to share. She was drowsy as I slipped under the covers. I simply embraced her and gazed upward until dawn broke. Come morning, I phoned in ill and headed back to that remote section under sunlight. I convinced myself it was essential to revisit, to confirm the events matched my recollection. The lady's vehicle had vanished. Zero traces of anyone's presence, no shattered shards, no ruts in the muck. Zilch. I crept along the detour I'd used for her, the path vanishing into the forest. By day it appeared serene, a silent rural lane flanked by leafless branches. Yet roughly a mile along, there it was, an opening to the side, screened from view by thick foliage. Within lay fresh wheel impressions, plenty of them. The earth was churned as if several cars had lingered there not long before. I stayed put in the cab. No need to investigate further. I recognized its purpose instantly. That spot was their ambush point, set for my arrival. Later that day, I visited the station, endured a 2-hour wait, and recounted it all to an officer who eyed me skeptically, as if it were pure invention. He jotted notes, posed a handful of queries, and assured me they'd check it out. Nearly 2 years have passed since. No follow-up, ever. I rang several times early on, inquiring about progress or discoveries. Responses were identical. No proof of wrongdoing, no matching complaints locally, hands tied. I scoured local reports on rural holdups or thefts in the district, seeking links to my ordeal. Zilch turned up, as though it were erased from existence. Yet I recall precisely what unfolded. I grasped their intentions clearly. On restless nights, my mind wanders to alternate paths, continuing deeper into that lane, overlooking the silhouettes amid the branches, placing faith in her a moment more. The glade, riddled with those prints, haunts me. How many motorists ventured there and failed to return? I avoid that path now, opting for an extended route that tacks on 20 minutes, but sticks to illuminated avenues bustling with cars. My partner has the complete account these days. Tears flowed as I confessed. She clung tightly, urging me to seek new employment. I'm tackling that gradually. Even so, on late drives, when I spot a stranded figure with blinkers flashing, nausea grips me. The urge to assist lingers. It's my nature, instilled from youth. But I pass by without fail. Self-loathing nips at me, wondering if they truly required aid, if their ride failed amid the frost, leaving them terrified and isolated. Still, I won't halt. Never again. I've learned some exploit goodwill as a trap. I'm only here recounting this because fortune smiled. I spotted them prematurely. Pure chance. That's solely why I returned safely, and that realization torments my sleep worst of all. 17 hours into a haul across the Dalton Highway in February, and you begin doubting every choice that led there. Back in 2009, my high school classmates had headed to universities, desk jobs, and comfortable existences with reliable warmth and free weekends. Meanwhile, I was clutching the wheel at 2 a.m., battling the Arctic's relentless assault. I was trucking freight for Kenworth Logistics from Fairbanks, delivering cargo to Prudhoe Bay in the winter when the ice routes became passable and the pay was high enough to cloud a guy's judgment. This particular trip involved transporting drilling gear valued at over 5 years' worth of my earnings, inching forward at 20 miles per hour as the blizzard erased everything into a blinding haze. My truck, a Peterbilt 379 I'd dubbed Rosemary in honor of my grandma, stood as my sole barrier against an icy grave by the roadside. The cab's heater roared at maximum, wipers slapping futilely at the accumulating flakes. And beyond the swirling void, daylight remained 6 hours away. I'd covered this route about 40 times across 3 winters, but nothing had ever matched the ferocity of tonight. The CB radio had been glitchy ever since Coldfoot, sputtering on and off as if an unseen hand toyed with the knob. I kept keying the mic to contact dispatch or any fellow drivers possibly navigating the storm, yet only fractured noise and empty quiet responded. That profound solitude on those stretches defies comprehension for anyone who's never piloted them. Endless expanses of frozen plain, permafrost, and rare icy stream valleys in all directions. No phone bars, no pull-offs, no distant homestead glows. Simply the path ahead, your beams slicing the dark, and gales buffeting your load like they aimed to flip it. For dire situations, I carried a sat phone, but glancing at it revealed zero connection. Odd, since they were built to function everywhere. I chalked it up to the tempest disrupting the orbit, figuring it'd rebound soon enough. That's when the silhouette appeared on the roadside verge, roughly 200 feet up, just within the faint reach of my lights. I lifted off the throttle, allowing Rosemary to decelerate gently rather than risk a skid on the hidden glaze under the drifts. The shape didn't stir, merely positioned toward the route. Drawing nearer, details emerged. A shadowy coat topped with a fur-trimmed cowl, features obscured, arms dangling loosely. No sign of a truck or sled nearby. Nothing to account for a human enduring this gale force obscurity at 2 a.m., 60 miles from the closest heated shelter. My initial instinct screamed of a motorist whose ride had failed, trudging until exhaustion set in, teetering on hypothermia's edge. I began maneuvering to the side, brake pedal poised, mentally ticking off the steps. Haul them aboard, blast the warmth, call for aid when comms revived. Yet an odd reluctance gripped me. The individual wasn't signaling or pleading, no frantic gestures from one craving salvation. Instead, they remained statue still, akin to a prop dumped in the drifts for cruel amusement. I rolled by at around 5 miles per hour, near enough for the beams to illuminate features, but the hood dipped low, revealing only obscurity. In the passenger mirror, the form lingered as I cleared it, unmoving, oriented toward the highway, as if anticipating an arrival. I urged myself to halt, reminded that abandoning them equated to a death sentence. But my grip refused to veer. Their posture felt off, an eerie rigidity defying the blasts strong enough to sway my rig. I tracked the image fading in the glass, engulfed by the flurry, a weight of remorse settling deep. Snatching the radio once more, I attempted to alert somebody to the encounter, but the line stayed barren with interference. The sat phone persisted in silence. Utterly isolated, I'd bypassed potential salvation for a soul because instinct screamed danger. The vision looped in my mind, the inky jacket, hooded fur, slack limbs, and I rationalized my choice as sound. Roughly 20 minutes on, the temp needle edged red on the dash. Rosemary had stayed cool through 3 years of hauls, so trouble hit fast and clear. I eased to the edge, cut the motor, and sat amid the cab's rattling din as the gale howled, giving the heat time to fade. The routine was straightforward. Allow cool down, inspect fluids, fire it up, and watch closely. I'd handled this routine 100 times on different trucks, but never amid weather this brutal. Never when halting meant risking frostbite on any bare skin in less than a minute. I fastened my parka to the top, slipped into my thermal gloves, and fished the flashlight out from beneath the seat. As soon as I swung the door open, the icy blast slammed into me like an invisible barrier, knocking the air from my chest and bringing tears to my eyes right away. I dropped to the ground and trudged to the truck's nose, my boots grinding against the compacted snow while the flashlight's ray struggled to pierce the whipping flakes. The coolant tank appeared normal. All the lines seemed secure. Nothing jumped out as the cause of the sudden heat surge. So it was likely a faulty sensor or some electrical fault acting up in the freeze. I was on the verge of heading back to the cab when I spotted the tracks. Over on the passenger flank of the vehicle, a solitary trail of boot marks cut through the new-fallen snow, stretching from some point aft of me straight to the trailer's rear. My light traced them down the side of the rig, ending abruptly at the trailer's back entrance, as if the maker had approached and then simply evaporated. With snow dumping so heavily, any marks would vanish fast in mere minutes, telling me these were recent, sometime in the past 20 minutes. All the while I'd been hunkered in the cab, letting the motor chill. Now I just gawked at them. My exhales billowing out in dense vapor plumes, struggling to process the sight. The area was deserted. No noises had reached me. No lights or motion had caught my eye. The stretch of highway behind lay barren. The path forward was equally void. Only the gale's moan and the engine's fading clicks filled the air. Yet somebody had crept right up to my trailer as I lounged oblivious inside, then melted away, leaving no sign. My mind flashed to that silhouette I'd overtaken 20 minutes back, and a chill unrelated to the storm seeped into my core. I edged toward the trailer's end, holding the flashlight high, braced for an ambush from the wheel wells. The prince ran flush to the paired doors and halted. Yet the seal remained unbroken. The sturdy latch I'd fastened in Fairbanks sat just as I'd placed it, undisturbed and iced over tight. This intruder hadn't attempted entry, hadn't gone after the contents. They'd merely approached, lingered by the doors, and then I prowled around the trailer cautiously, scanning each dark corner and space under the axles, but found nothing. The wind screamed and flakes danced wildly, confirming my utter isolation. The notion of backtracking those prints to their origin tempted me briefly, but venturing from the truck into that blank void knotted my gut with dread. Rather, I rushed to the cab, clambered in, and bolted both locks. My pulse thrummed fiercely in my head. I keyed the radio once more, craving any human sound, yet the interference crackled fiercer, like some rival broadcast jamming it. The motor had settled enough to turn over again, so I revved up Rosemary and merged back onto the route, cranking the throttle as much as safety allowed in such peril. Every moment or so, I glanced in the mirrors, scanning for pursuing beams or stirrings within the enveloping blizzard. Zilch. Just flakes. Night. And the dim red of my own rear lamps bouncing off the turmoil. I pressed on for about 10 miles, fingers clenched white on the steering wheel, before something forced me to brake lightly once more. The trailer was rocking, not the usual sway from blasts or bumpy pavement, but a steady, purposeful swing as though cargo within was deliberately redistributing mass back and forth. I knew the load well: drill gear, boxes of components, hefty factory goods lashed to platforms. It all should stay put. It couldn't shift without loosened ties or an occupant shoving against it from within. In the mirror, I watched it pendulum lazily again, defying any logical cause. Every follicle on my arms prickled under the jacket. No way was I halting. That much was crystal clear. Whatever lurked in the rear, whoever did, they aimed to lure me off the road anew. They craved me out in the open, defenseless. That road phantom had been decoy. The mechanical glitch, a snare, and this motion, yet another ploy to halt me. I floored the pedal, sensing Rosemary lunge ahead. The gauge ticked beyond 30, hitting 35, reckless velocity for glazed ice in a total whiteout. The trailer was bucking wildly in my wake now, as if the presence inside sensed my speed and was fighting to disrupt my control. I clutched the steering wheel tightly with both hands, fixing my gaze on the slim ribbon of road visible through the blizzard, desperately hoping to avoid any hidden black ice or snowbank that might hurl me into a skid. Dead Horse lay about 40 miles ahead, the next outpost, and if I could reach it without halting, I'd be out of danger. There'd be fellow drivers, other rigs, lights, heat, and eyes to see what was happening. All I needed was to press on and resist glancing behind. That's when the thumping began. It echoed from right overhead on the cab's roof. A forceful, steady beat, like a person up there hammering their knuckles against the steel. I flinched hard in my seat, almost veering into the ditch. My pulse raced so fiercely I struggled to draw breath. The thumps persisted. 3 strikes, a break, then 3 again. A rhythm too intentional for coincidence. I attempted to convince myself it was chunks of ice dropping from a bridge or storm-blown junk, anything except the truth staring me down. But the Dalton Highway has no bridges. Overhead, there's only vast sky, falling snow, and the rare crow. Someone was perched on my truck's roof, battering it as I navigated the blinding gale at 40 miles per hour. No clue how they'd climbed aboard or what they sought. I stomped the gas and urged Rosemary faster, to 50, then 55, the trailer whipping side to side, the rooftop blows quickening and growing urgent. The radio hissed to life abruptly, and for a pulse-pounding instant, a muffled, warped murmur cut through before fading into noise. I lost track of time barreling along like that, racing blind with an intruder above and something lurking in back. Fingers fused to the wheel, eyes stinging from unblinking strain. Maybe 20 minutes passed, or perhaps a full hour, duration blurred into irrelevance. The pounding would halt for agonizing intervals, then resume. Now straight over my head, now shifting toward the cab's rear, as though the figure was scooting about, probing various points. Once, a grating scrape rang out by the passenger side, metal scraping metal, and I glanced just in time to catch a shadowy blur streak by the window. Perhaps a palm or a foot, vanishing before I could zero in. I yelped outright in the cab, yanking the wheel so sharply the trailer folded dangerously for a heart-stopping beat until I righted it. Ahead stretched endless white. The side mirrors reflected endless white. My sole evidence that this nightmare was genuine. The relentless roof assaults, the erratic trailer lurching, and the metallic tang of blood on my tongue from clenching it too hard. Then, as if by divine intervention, lights appeared. Dim yellow at first, a distant haze I dismissed as a trick of the mind, but they intensified as I bore down on them. Dead Horse, the way station. Building silhouettes emerged, sodium lights piercing the flurry in orange beams. Parked trucks dotting the yard. I blared the horn without mercy, honking relentlessly as I charged the outpost, heedless of rousing anyone for miles around. The rooftop thuds ceased the instant those lights sharpened. Cut off cold, like a circuit breaker thrown. The trailer's wobble eased to mere highway jostle. When I screeched into the lot and braked hard before the central structure, all fell silent. I remained parked there, motor idling, doors secured, knuckles white on the wheel, braced for whatever came next. Nothing stirred. Staff emerged from the building, summoned by the clamor, advancing with torches, expressions puzzled and worried. At last I cracked the door and tottered into the freeze, words failing me. I merely gestured to the roof, then the trailer, croaking a single syllable. Quote 2. They combed it all. Half a dozen guys armed with beams and pry bars scoured my entire outfit, while I huddled in the warmth of the office, swaddled in a blanket, sipping tasteless brew. Scuff marks marred the cab roof, long, vicious scrapes through the paint, absent when I'd rolled out of Fairbanks. A underbelly vent on the trailer stood ajar, screws mangled, edges warped inward from brute force entry. The load remained secure, lashed precisely as I'd arranged it. Yet damp boot tracks soiled the trailer's deck, and palm smudges dotted the bulkheads where a body had steadied against the motion. The doors swung open to emptiness. Whoever had hitched a ride had slipped away, melting into the tempest before the wheels fully halted. Law enforcement officers recorded my account and mentioned that I wasn't the initial motorist to mention an incident like this along the Dalton Highway. Similar cases had cropped up from drivers over the years. Semi-trucks discovered deserted without a trace of the operator. Vehicles pulling into inspection points bearing unexplained harm. Accounts of shadowy shapes appearing on the pavement amid weather that no rational individual could endure. Authorities never apprehended a soul. They never recovered any remains. All they possessed were tales, countless ones, stretching back through the decades. After that evening, I stopped transporting goods over ice routes entirely. I submitted my resignation to Kenworth the moment I returned to Fairbanks and didn't give it another thought. These days, I handle nearby deliveries, brief trips across the contiguous states where fuel stops appear every 20 miles and cell coverage stays reliable. The pay stinks by comparison, but I get restful nights now, unlike those initial 6 months following the journey. Even so, it lingers in my mind. I recall the silhouette planted on the roadside edge, unmoving against gusts that ought to have toppled it. I ponder the tracks that approached my trailer before vanishing, the steady thumps echoing from my cab's ceiling in the grip of that gale, or whatever force clawed by my glass at 50 miles per hour. I reflect on the exterior access cover forced ajar from beyond. And I speculate on how much time that entity spent clinging beneath my rig before scaling upward. What might have unfolded if I'd braked when the load began to wobble? If I'd stepped out to inspect the load as any sensible hauler might? The cops assured me staying in motion was wise, that the distant station's glows likely preserved my existence. I trust their words. Yet on certain evenings, as the breeze intensifies and shadows crowd my panes, that steady rhythm still echoes overhead. I triple verify the bolts before drifting off. It was roughly 2 a.m. on a Thursday in February when the utter quiet jolted me awake. That might sound odd, but folks who've endured a genuine winter grasp it. Drifting off amid the furnace's drone and the icebox's hum conditions your mind to the racket. It fades into comforting static, like a soothing tune. Then, when all sound ceases abruptly, the void strikes sharper than any clamor. I propped myself upright, sensing the chill already seeping through the space. My cell lay on the bedside table. Glancing at it revealed 2:17 a.m. with 63% charge. Zero signal. Electricity had failed, and from the plummeting warmth it must have been down for some time. I tugged the cover closer over my arms and paused, weighing whether to rise or hold out till dawn. I'd leased the spot for 2 weeks to focus on scripting far from urban chaos. The modest dwelling sat about 40 minutes beyond Portland, Oregon, at the close of a dirt lane with just 3 other spots dotted nearby. My closest resident was likely a half-mile distant. I'd hit 34 the prior month and resolved to complete the book I'd labored over for 3 years. An acquaintance's contact owned the retreat and offered it affordably during the slow period. Booking it felt brilliant at the time. Serene, remote, tranquil. But huddled in total blackness without warmth or contact options, serene didn't fit. I snatched my device, activated the light, and swept the beam across the sleeping quarters. All seemed ordinary. My computer on the table, bag in the angle, pane, revealing only void with my pale image gazing inward. I resolved to inspect the remainder, mainly to confirm no lines had ruptured or similar issues. The proprietor had cautioned that the pipes acted temperamental in harsh freezes, and flooding atop the outage was the last hassle I wanted. I swung my feet from the sheets and winced right away. The boards bit cold, biting despite my heavy foot coverings. I spotted my footwear by the entrance and jammed my toes in, skipping the ties. The gadget's glow sliced a thin path through the gloom as I padded along the brief corridor to the cooking space. The structure was compact, a sleeping area, washroom, merged lounge, and galley, plus a cramped entry nook at the rear exit. Traversing it all took perhaps 30 seconds. The cooler hummed no more, the burners felt icy, and toggling a fixture switch yielded zilch out of reflex. I lingered in the galley, ears attuned. Beyond, gusts battered the siding. Within, silence reigned, save my breaths and the faint groan of planks beneath me. That's when I chose to examine the panes and entries. Not from fear yet, but as a prudent measure. With the electricity gone throughout the neighborhood, that implied pitch-black conditions, no illuminated streets, no glowing porches, zero visibility. Complete blackness enveloped the outdoors. And here I was, a solitary woman in an unfamiliar home, situated in a spot where I had no acquaintances. So it only seemed prudent to verify that all entry points were secured. I began at the main entrance, which was firmly bolted. Next came the pair of living room panes, each properly fastened. Even the bathroom one, far too narrow for any intruder to squeeze through, was secured. I put off inspecting the rear exit until the end, since it led to the mudroom, the chilliest section of the dwelling. Upon reaching it, I directed my phone's beam through the narrow pane in the door, anticipating only a blanket of white. Sure enough, snow blanketed everything, having piled up consistently from the previous evening. Yet something in the view halted me, prompting a second glance. The accumulation on the rear deck showed signs of interference, not the haphazard tracks of wildlife, but rather as if a person had swept it clear from the threshold, forming a direct route to the knob. I lingered there, gaze fixed, for an indeterminate stretch of time. My thoughts scrambled for rationalizations. Perhaps gusts had sculpted it that way, or maybe a drift from the eaves had formed such a shape. But the closer I examined, the flimsier those ideas seemed. The powder had been intentionally shoved into a curved sweep, reminiscent of an arm or fabric brushing it aside to expose the latch. Plus, the deck stairs bore indentations in the drifts, not full boot prints, given the fine texture that likely refilled them somewhat, but definite dips from footfalls. A constriction gripped my torso, and I retreated a pace from the portal, phone aloft with its glow trained on the glass. The mechanism was a basic bolt, which I tested repeatedly to confirm it held. It did. Yet that offered scant reassurance. An individual had clearly lingered on that deck not long ago, likely within the prior couple of hours, judging by the minimal fresh layer atop the swept spot. In the dead of night, amid the outage, someone had approached my rear entrance to peer unobstructed at the grip. I withdrew from the mudroom gradually. Beam! Steady on the barrier as if it could fly open any second. My thoughts churned wildly. Dialing emergency services crossed my mind. But glancing at my device revealed 0 bars again, no connection whatsoever. The property sat in a signal-poor area already, and the tempest must have disrupted the closest antenna or similar infrastructure. I considered the vehicle stationed at the curb, keys tucked in my bag back in the sleeping quarters. I could snatch them, dash into the void, and head to a fuel stop or any populated site. But that entailed venturing into the obscurity, the flurry, where a lurker might lie in wait. Indecision paralyzed me. I extinguished the light to conserve power and halted in the cooking space, permitting my vision to acclimate to the gloom. The glass allowed a subtle radiance from the external drifts, sufficient to discern shadowy forms of fixtures. I strained to catch any noise beyond the thrum of my pulse echoing in my skull. Initially, silence reigned for several moments. Just the howl of gales and the sporadic groan of timbers shifting. I began questioning if I was amplifying the threat. Perhaps an intoxicated wanderer had mistaken the address and departed upon discovery. Or the landlord might have surveyed the site without my noticing a rap at the door. I was on the verge of relaxing somewhat when the noise came, a faint rustle from the house's rear, emanating from the mudroom. It wasn't boisterous. No slam or clatter. Rather, the subdued, deliberate twist of a knob being probed. A gradual rotation, a hesitation, then another attempt, as if the outsider were gauging whether the barrier would yield quietly. Breath caught in my throat. I flattened against the countertop and remained immobile. The motion ceased. I endured, tallying heartbeats mentally. 10, 20, 30. Stillness. Then, easing for a clearer view toward the back, the plank beneath me emitted a sharp groan. Instantly, the probing at the rear halted. Realization dawned. The presence beyond was attuned, having detected my shift and now plotting my position indoors. Nausea surged. This wasn't a bumbling inebriate or misguided local. It was a deliberate actor aware of my occupancy, scheming entry without detection. I clung rigid to the surface, respiration shallow, for what seemed endless. Tremors quaked my limbs from the prolonged tension. Footsteps followed outside, not fading away, but progressing laterally along the exterior, softly compressing the drifts. The figure was methodically orbiting the structure. I followed the noise as it shifted from the rear of the property toward the front, gliding right by the living room windows. I was dying to peek out and identify the person, but fear gripped me. I worried that any motion toward the glass would alert them to my exact spot. Instead, I froze and simply eavesdropped as the steps dragged past, unhurried and intentional, as if the intruder had all the time in the world. The footfalls halted close to the front entrance. I held my breath, listening intently for any clue. A whole minute ticked by in silence. Then another. I began to wonder if they'd vanished when suddenly the front doorknob jiggled. Far rougher than at the back door, this attempt felt aggressive, like subtlety was no longer an option. The door frame shuddered, yet it stayed secure. I'd bolted it tight, thankfully, and it was sturdy oak reinforced with a reliable deadbolt. Still, the chilling racket of someone blatantly attempting to break in while I cowered in the shadows is etched in my memory forever. Right then, I resolved to act. I crept silently toward the bedroom, one hand trailing the wall to guide me. No flashlight for me. I couldn't risk silhouetting myself. Once inside, I fished my car keys from my bag and snatched the modest paring knife I'd used for slicing apples that afternoon. It wasn't ideal, but it offered some reassurance. I huddled next to the bed, pressing my spine to the wall to block any rear approach, and braced myself. The doorknob assault ceased after about 30 seconds. Then utter quiet returned. I'm not sure how much time I spent huddled on that cold floor in pitch blackness. Perhaps 20 minutes, maybe 2 full hours. Reality blurred. The slightest creak sent my pulse racing. The house settling, a breeze rattling outside. My own breaths echoed like thunder. Eventually, the steps resumed, this time retreating from the building. They crunched over the snow, fading gradually until silence swallowed them completely. Yet doubt gnawed at me. I suspected a ruse, that the prowler had simply relocated to bide their time until I relaxed. So I remained rooted, clutching that pathetic blade, eyes fixed on the dim outline of the bedroom window for the tiniest shift. Gradually, the heavens paled, that subtle dawn glow shifting the night to a deep indigo. Nothing had ever made me so thankful for daylight breaking. I didn't budge until visibility improved enough to scan the yard from the window and verify the coast was clear. Rising at last, every muscle screamed from the prolonged crouch. The electricity remained off, but natural light sufficed now, no need for illumination. I toured the interior, inspecting each pane and portal. Fresh scratches marred the front lock area, deep scars in the timber from a forced entry bid. The back door bore identical new damage near its bolt. Venturing out the front, I hugged the walls and circled the grounds. The fresh powder revealed it all. Prints dotted the landscape, looping the structure repeatedly, pausing at every casement, bunching thickly by both entries. Large impressions, likely from a male given their scale. I traced their path visually as long as possible. They veered off toward the tree line at the rear and vanished into the forest. I didn't pursue. Back indoors, I hastily collected my belongings and hit the road in under 10 minutes. No time to secure the door. I simply fled. I headed directly to the local precinct and recounted the ordeal. Officers dispatched a team to the site, but new snowfall had obscured most tracks by then. They noted the door blemishes, snapped photos, and logged the incident. The responding cop suggested it was likely an opportunist, aware the place often sat vacant during winter, figuring it empty. Perhaps scavenging for loot or shelter from the chill. No arrests followed. I notified the owner, who was stunned. Nothing comparable had ever occurred there. I skipped the remaining 2 weeks. No request for compensation. I yearned to erase it all. But what haunts my sleep even 3 years on is this: that figure outside wasn't fumbling blindly. They brushed snow from the handles prior to testing them. They paused to detect my motions within. They patrolled the exterior, probing each access, calm and systematic. When access was denied, they simply turned and vanished into the nearby woods without a second thought. I caught no glimpse of any faces, nor a single utterance. I'll never know their identities or the reason they targeted that particular home on that evening. And likely, the truth will always elude me. Greenleaf copy and print occupied the terminus of a rundown strip mall along Route 17, one of those overlooked establishments that endured through sheer customer devotion and sheer grit rather than steady visitors. I'd been employed there for roughly 8 months at that point, managing the front desk, assisting folks with flyers and posters, and every so often snapping passport pictures for patrons who inevitably griped about the results. My boss, Rich Oberlin, a burly fellow in his 50s who'd taken over from his dad, phoned me just before midday on that Wednesday, inquiring if I'd handle the evening close. Stacy, our usual night shift worker, had phoned out sick with a nasty sore throat that left her sounding like she'd swallowed a handful of rocks. At 24 years old, still grinding down debts from a communications degree that hadn't yielded much payoff yet, I snatched up any additional hours available. The forecast predicted flurries, but nothing alarming. Pulling into the lot at 3 p.m., I noted the sky's ominous, swollen hue, the kind that signals trouble brewing in upstate New York. In hindsight, I should have heeded the warning. By 5:30, the broadcast's major winter disturbance had smothered the pavement in a deep layer of white. Fat flakes tumbled relentlessly, slashing sight lines to mere feet. Vehicles inching down Route 17 resembled spectral shapes gliding through haze. Rich rang to confirm, his signal crackling poorly, stressing that the business hadn't shuttered ahead of schedule once in its 18-year history. Small-town pride, you know. I assured him I'd power through till 9 o'clock, mentally tallying the bonus pay. The adjacent nail parlor doused its lights near 6 o'clock, and I saw the proprietor dash to her vehicle, hood drawn tight, wheels slipping momentarily before she melted into the blizzard. From then on, the whole plaza was mine alone. The front stayed reasonably toasty thanks to the heater, but I was aware the rear spaces, the stockroom, the disused lounge, lingered about 10 degrees chillier. For the next couple of hours, I hunkered at the register with a dog-eared book as gusts battered the storefront glass and drifts mounted against the entrance. 0 walk-ins, no rings on the line, just the buzz of overhead fluorescence and the gale's feral wail beyond the walls. At around 7:15, I figured I'd brew a cup in the lounge. The setup was compact and familiar. The reception and service zone claimed about a third of the footprint, with hulking copiers and presses dominating the core. Past that stretched a slim corridor branching left to storage, right to the lounge, and terminating in a rear exit that led to a modest dock out back. That exit had jammed up ages ago, sealed by layers of paint per rich. And no one ever got around to mending it because shipments came via the main door. Snatching my mug, I strode by the idle equipment, screens blank and dormant. The lounge was unremarkable. A compact fridge, a microwave scarred by forgotten pasta spills, a rickety table flanked by odd chairs, and a percolator likely dating to the Clinton era. I hit the switch, and the lone fixture stuttered before steadying. The air bit colder than normal, which I chalked up to the tempest and the faulty rear ducts. As the pot dripped, I propped against the edge and browsed my cell, skimming a piece on storm-spawned pile-ups along the highway. The aroma of budget brew wafted through, blending with the stale tang that clings to aged structures after years. That's when the initial noise hit, a faint bump echoing from farther within toward the stock area. I froze mid-swipe, ears straining instinctively. Silence followed. Only the machine's last sputters amid the storm's dull thunder. I dismissed it as likely junk tumbling from a rack. Perhaps reams of boxes teetering in the cluttered stockpile that Rich left in perpetual chaos. I fixed my coffee with a couple sugar hits and returned to the desk. The passage felt gloomier now, though I knew it was merely nerves conjuring shadows. As I went by the storage room door, I saw it was cracked open just a couple of inches, a sliver of shadow peeking between it and the jamb. I was sure it had been shut tight when I'd passed earlier. I paused briefly, then stretched out to ease it closed until the catch snapped into place. In these aging structures, things expand and contract in the bitter chill. Doors can swing ajar on their own. I muttered that reassurance to myself while heading back to the front, clutching my steaming cup a bit more firmly than needed. The following hour went by uneventfully, and I began to unwind once more. I wrapped up a section in my novel, glanced at the radar app on my phone, and observed the snow building up steadily beyond the glass. The mounds by the entrance had climbed to almost 2 feet high, and I grew concerned about whether my reliable old Subaru could even navigate out of the lot come quitting time. At around 8:20, I stood to loosen up and chose to patrol the store's edges. It was half to kill time and half because a nagging unease in my thoughts kept pulling me back to that storage door. The front section appeared perfectly normal, the counter spotless, the shelves untouched, the panes revealing only a whirl of white flakes. I proceeded beyond the copiers and printers, trailing my fingers over their sleek tops, attuned to the structure's creaks and sighs beneath the growing snow load. At the corridor, I halted abruptly. The storage door stood ajar once more, this time not merely cracked but flung wide, exposing the inky void within like a gaping maw ready to devour. I lingered there, what seemed an eternity, a solid minute, gazing into that obsidian void. The room lacked windows or any daylight, with just one overhead bulb activated by a chain dangling about 6 feet down. I discerned faint shapes of shelves and piled cartons, yet nothing stirred. No noises echoed. My pulse quickened noticeably, and I suddenly felt the isolation acutely, so distant from anyone else. Logic in my head urged a simple reason. Perhaps the catch was faulty, or the frame had twisted from years and weather shifts. I fished out my phone, switched on its light, and directed the glow into the space. Stacks of printer paper, ink cartridges, outdated promo posters Rich wouldn't discard, coils of vinyl for the sign maker. All seemed untouched, dusted lightly and shimmering under the beam. I ventured 2 paces in, groping for the chain, and that's when the tracks caught my eye. They were subtle, scarcely noticeable on the dusty concrete, but unmistakable. A sequence of boot marks stretching from the far rear corner right up to the threshold where I positioned myself. Somebody had traversed this spot not long ago. Somebody in boots, maybe size 10 or 11 judging by their outline, and the path led solely outward toward the store's front, implying the intruder remained within these walls. My immediate urge was to bolt for the exit and escape, yet I held back. The drifts outdoors must have hit 3 feet by then, and my vehicle sat at minimum 50 yards off. Should this person be hostile and sharing the space with me, I'd be slogging through waist-high powder in pitch blackness as they observed safely from the heated confines. I withdrew from the room cautiously, phone beam pointed forward, struggling to steady my breaths. The break room entrance remained shut just as I'd set it before. The rear exit down the hall, the one Rich claimed was sealed with paint, seemed unchanged. But drawing nearer, breath held, I spotted details that left my knees buckling. Near the lock, the frame bore new gouges in the paint, stark white streaks on the faded beige, and the panel hung askew in its surround. An outsider had pried it ajar. Any snow on the tiny back stoop would have buried footprints swiftly, so this individual might have slipped in hours earlier, well before the blizzard sealed us together. I slipped back to the front desk as silently as possible, my shoes whispering over the low-pile office rug. My thoughts churned over the store's floor plan, pondering potential hideouts. The storage area appeared empty, at least the bulk of it. The lounge was far too cramped for prolonged concealment. Then I recalled a spot I'd overlooked, a slim access panel recessed into the divider between the duplicator zone and the passage, where Rich stashed janitorial gear and some defunct equipment. Its door merged nearly invisibly with the surrounding trim. Simple to overlook unless you knew its location. In 8 months, I'd accessed it only a pair of times. I remembered leaving the counter twice that shift. First to fetch a mop after a customer knocked over their coffee, and later when Rich sent me hunting for a particular spare part for the printers. From my spot behind the register, I fixed my gaze on that stretch of wall, gripping my phone tightly while racking my brain for any odd detail I'd overlooked during my earlier pass by it. The utility closet's door featured a petite brass knob, darkened to nearly black from years of use, and at this range, it was impossible to say whether it sat fully shut or ajar just a bit. The last thing I wanted was to investigate. Help was what I needed right away. Yet glancing at my screen, I saw the signal had withered to one wavering bar. Clearly the blizzard was messing with the towers, or perhaps the heavy snowfall blocked every transmission. Still, I dialed 911 and jammed the device to my ear, only to hear crackling emptiness. No tone, nothing. Next, I eyed the countertop's landline, that outdated cream-colored set Rich maintained as a fail-safe but seldom touched. I lifted the handset and met pure silence, void of any hum. The storm had surely felled the cables, smothered beneath layers of frost and drifts en route to civilization. Isolated now, I shared the space with an uninvited presence who'd slipped inside and concealed themselves for ages, observing my routine unwind, oblivious to their vigil. That realization sent chills crawling over my skin, a mix of dread and disgust. In my mind, I replayed brewing drinks, flipping through pages, scrolling notifications, all under the unseen scrutiny of an outsider skulking in the dim corners, tracking my every shift, biding time for some unknown purpose. What that purpose might be haunted me worst, since answers eluded me entirely. Abruptly, a noise pierced the quiet, undeniable this round. No thud or groan, but a measured tread echoing from the corridor, followed by a second. A figure advanced toward the store's front, abandoning all stealth. I dropped low behind the counter, flattening against the solid divider, and snatched the nearest makeshift defense, a robust trimmer with its extended steel edge. The steps halted close to the copiers, roughly 20 feet from my hiding spot. Now I detected respiration, rhythmic and composed, like someone utterly at ease. Mine emerged in ragged bursts I fought to stifle by clamping my palm over my mouth. Peering through a narrow space, where counter met partition, I glimpsed a thin wedge of the floor area, sufficient to spot any passerby. Tension stretched on forever. The inhales persisted, clockwork regular, until it hit me with sickening certainty. My pursuer pinpointed my location. They'd likely seen me dive out of sight. There they loomed amid my familiar surroundings, in no rush whatsoever, savoring how cornered, panicked, and powerless I felt. Suddenly, beams of light slashed across the entrance panes, vivid and unexpected, slicing the flurry like divine intervention. A vehicle had swung into the lot, its motor growling potently through the barriers. The steps behind me hastened, pulling away toward the passage. No longer languid, but hurried and desperate. Instinct took over. I rose and yelled, flailing toward the outsider's ride. More primal outburst than coherent plea, it tore from deep inside. The truck braked some 30 feet from the threshold, and a shape emerged, swathed in thick layers, trudging snowward to the entry. In the rear, a bang resounded, the rear exit meant to be sealed with paint, and then stillness. I bolted to the front, forcing it wide past the accumulating pile, icy gusts stinging like a strike, and all but collided with the approaching stranger. Earl, as he turned out to be, worked for a towing service and had stopped to ride out the gale's peak before heading to his next job. He noted how ghostly I appeared, ashen and trembling, struggling to string words together. I explained an intruder had shared the premises, entering via the rear, and he assisted in combing the premises, tire iron at the ready in his grip. The closet stood ajar when we reached it. Tucked beyond a faulty laminator lay a stranger's knapsack, unknown to the staff. With gloved caution, Earl extracted it, and we inspected the contents side by side. Spare outfit, a 6-inch hunting blade, a spool of adhesive tape, compact torch, and a disposable cell devoid of numbers. Plus, a creased sheet listing the store's schedule, scrawled with quote 4 in sloppy script. From his cab's comms, Earl summoned authorities, who rolled in roughly an hour on, once the snowplows had carved a path along Route 17. The police seized the backpack for evidence and remarked that I was fortunate, employing a crude term I'd rather not echo. They spotted footprints in the snow trailing from the rear of the structure, music, toward the forest, roughly a quarter-mile off. Yet the blizzard had erased them before anyone could pursue. They never apprehended the culprit. I left that position just 2 days afterward and returned to my folks' place in Connecticut for several months, until the slightest sudden noise no longer made me flinch. Even now, that message lingers in my mind, the one revealing how someone had surveilled the store for so long they knew the routine inside out. Knew that Wednesdays involved a single worker on duty solo until closing at 9. I reflect on those evenings lost in my novel and sipping coffee, oblivious to an intruder armed with a blade and rolls of tape lurking in the shadows, merely 10 feet distant, inhaling steadily and peering through the sliver of an ajar storage door. And I ponder what might have unfolded if Earl had chosen to shelter from the weather elsewhere. Solitude had always suited me prior to that harsh season. Back then, I went by Clara. Music, having leased a secluded cabin far from the closest settlement to cut costs and gain some mental space. My job allowed working from anywhere, days unfolded in tranquility, and remoteness seemed more like an indulgence than a peril. Blizzards were routine in those parts, so I'd prepared as advised, amassing supplies. The weather report predicted substantial snowfall, nothing out of the ordinary, and I recall a spark of anticipation for the imposed calm. That daybreak, the outdoors had hushed, enveloped in a dense, snowy hush. Gusts swept stray flakes over the grounds akin to drifting haze. Within, the dwelling groaned as aged structures often do amid falling mercury. Come evening, the tempest sharpened its edge. Accumulations mounted against the entrances quicker than I could clear them, and the path vanished entirely. Cell reception wavered unpredictably, then electricity cut abruptly, casting all areas into premature twilight. The furnace failed, reduced to the subtle clink of contracting ducts. I resorted to tapers for illumination, their glows flickering with each battering of the gales on the exterior. I reassured myself this was standard, a fierce but fleeting gale. Yet the pauses amid the blasts rang excessively profound, as though the building itself were pausing to exhale. Noises resonated with newfound intensity, unlike anything previous. The initial strike occurred shortly after nightfall. A muffled thump on the exterior barrier, down low and substantial, succeeded by a subsequent one nearer the rear. Logical explanations pointed to roof-shed ice or gale-tossed rubbish, and that's the narrative I clung to. The disturbances recurred, sporadically yet purposefully enough to snag my focus repeatedly. Music. Each collision probed a fresh portion of the structure. I roamed between chambers, straining to pinpoint origins, attempting to chart the pattern. The gale roared sufficiently to muddle the chaos, but those blows cut through, more distinct. I steered clear of the panes, reluctant to glimpse whatever lurked outside. In time, intrigue prevailed. Grasping a single taper, I neared the parlor's glass, clearing inner moisture with my arm. Flurries obscured much of the surface, compacted densely. Still, a murkier form drew my gaze where the cover grew spotty, irregular, disturbingly recognizable. It resembled digits spread broad, flattened outward on the exterior pane. Ere I could absorb it entirely, the trace dissolved as flakes resettled. Soon, a further blow landed on the house's far flank. That's when it dawned. The presence beyond wasn't haphazard, nor confined to a single spot. Darkness bore down intensely thereafter. Tapers dwindled, chill advancing over the planks in gradual, benumbing surges. The strikes persisted, timed to disrupt any predictability, as if the entity encircling refused to let me adapt. Mere breezes couldn't account for the relocation from barrier to barrier. Once, music the racket emanated directly adjacent to the entryway, near enough that I detected ensuing cascades of powder. I lingered in the corridor, attuned, unwittingly tallying my inhalations. The space contracted with each tick of the clock. The overhead even loomed nearer, the onslaught compressing all inward. Before long, another pane bore traces. A crude circular scrape through the rime from without, paired with a palm-like imprint music nearby. The digits stretched elongated, jagged, etching distinct furrows in the drifts that betrayed firm contact. They never persisted, evading scrutiny by my approach. Whenever I edged nearer, the signs blurred, supplanted by renewed flurries as if illusory. The maelstrom served as a veil, concealing shifts in the lulls. The prowler orbiting the perimeter exploited that perfectly. The notion took root gradually, unyielding. The rhythm of the pounding shifted afterward, becoming steadier and more deliberate, far from the wild frenzy before. A hit echoed close to the kitchen, then one by the bedroom, timed like footsteps circling the edges. My cell phone gave out entirely, its display going dark and cutting off any link to the world. The chill deepened so quickly indoors that puffs of breath hung in the air. Piling on clothes offered little relief, and my attention zeroed in on keeping heat in and senses sharp. No prints showed up in the yard, though the snow near the base kept moving subtly. Whatever lurked nearby was stirring it up without revealing itself. Weariness eventually pushed me to act. The pantry seemed the most secure spot, tucked away in the house's heart and compact. I gathered blankets, tins of food, and my last candle before sealing myself inside. The thuds persisted for what felt like ages, drawing near at times, fading at others, until the gale's howl drowned them out. Gradually, all noise faded, replaced by gusts and cracking frost. Dawn's glow seeped dimly through gaps as the blizzard finally relented. Beyond the walls, nothing showed. No scars, no harm, no trails, only pristine drifts. When paths cleared a few days on, I bolted from there and never went back, haunted by the mystery of who'd timed the tempest to isolate me. Daybreak didn't unfold, as it normally would. Instead of a crisp dawn, the gloom simply lifted bit by bit as the weather backed off. I lingered in the pantry past when I should have, ears strained for any odd sound. Emerging at last, the home struck me as off in a new sense, eerily still, akin to the hush following a heated clash. The indoor air bit with frost, and each footfall splintered the planks sharply. I crept from space to space, flame extended ahead, peering at panes, entrances, and shadows. All appeared whole. No shattered panes, no signs of intrusion. That realization chilled me more. The outer glow exposed details I wished hidden. Drifts mounded nearly to sill height, sleek and pristine, save for spots that seemed tampered with. By the sitting room pane, the cover wasn't sculpted by winds. It lay compressed in spots, irregular, as if weight had rested there before pulling away. The dents were subtle, yet purposeful, dug in beyond what flakes alone could do. Through the lingering fog, I surveyed the grounds as best I could, braced for motion. None came. No paths trailed off, no hints of exit. The tempest had wiped clean all but those quiet disturbances right at the building's edge. Pushing the entryway ajar took real force, the white barrier pushing back as if to confine me. A blast of icy tin-tanged wind surged through, bringing that hollow calm after chaos. I paused on the threshold, ears tuned once more, vulnerable and trembling from more than the freeze. The barriers that once seemed solid now felt flimsy and untrustworthy. What had prowled without had opted against breaching, and that restraint unnerved me worse than an assault would have. The idea that an intruder had probed the place and then retreated lingered, a weight without closure. By afternoon, with routes passable, I loaded essentials and departed before dusk could creep in. I skipped seeking answers or comfort from others. The dwelling reverted to mere framework amid the white, mute, and vacant. To this day, long after, those moments replay in pieces. The pattern of the blows, how the traces formed and faded, the calculated feel of it. I remain in the dark about the outsider's identity or the gale's role in their plans. All I grasp is that the elements served as a veil, and clarity was never the intent. Winter dawns around my area tended to be so hushed I could catch the crunch of my soles in the powder. Back then, I occupied a modest lease solo at the town's fringe, pulling odd shifts and relying on lengthy strolls to unwind. The route beyond my block was unofficial, merely a trodden lane that residents took to weave among the woods. That morning, the bite in the air was crisp and arid, stinging nostrils with each inhale. I hesitated about venturing out, given the icy footing and burdened clouds. Yet the exercise, the habit, some semblance of ordinary pulled me along. I fastened my jacket high and set off for the woodland fringe, anticipating little beyond quiet and iced limbs. Roughly a quarter-hour along, a figure appeared farther down the path. That in itself wasn't odd, but their attire grabbed me right away. Bare hands, no head cover, and a lightweight coat suited more for mild autumn than this. Their gait dragged, halting and shaky, etching light furrows in the cover. Now and then, they'd freeze, head cocked as though attuned to pursuit from rear. Unthinkingly, I eased my stride, holding a consistent gap. The surrounding forest felt thicker than ever, a shadowy expanse that muffled every noise. I couldn't help but consider how vulnerable that individual must have felt to the biting chill, though they appeared utterly unperturbed. Close to a toppled tree, the trail forked, with the primary route bending back toward the nearby homes. Rather than stick to it, the figure up ahead diverted into a zone dotted with weathered caution notices fastened to the bark. Folks from around here typically steered clear of that stretch, as it skirted conserved territory and the ground sloped away abruptly. Without a pause, they crossed the flimsy cordon as if it were invisible. I halted entirely, my exhales forming misty clouds in the frigid air, grappling with my next move. A urge tugged at me to shout, perhaps alert them to the risk, but the words caught in my throat. The silence pressed down harder now, as if the woods themselves were stifling it. After what seemed an eternity, I pivoted and headed home, frustrated and on edge for allowing some unknown wanderer to unsettle me so. Time slipped by, and the incident dimmed to a fleeting recollection, surfacing only on subsequent strolls along that route. Then one night, emergency beacons illuminated the street by my house, casting crimson and azure hues across the frosted landscape. Squad cars lined the trailhead, with authorities slipping in and out among the timber. Rumors soon circulated that they were combing the off-limit zone due to some separate probe. No one breathed a word about spotting anyone on the path or uncovering oddities that afternoon. Yet peering from my window as the strobes danced on the tree line, the vision of that scantily clad shape surged back with unnerving sharpness. It struck me as a fragment of a bigger elusive puzzle I'd grazed without grasping. Those ensuing days altered my navigation through that neighborhood corner. The walkway remained accessible, but its easy flow had vanished. I began eyeing the foliage overhead instead of the earth below, spotting details I'd overlooked for ages. Splintered limbs heaped in peculiar spots, subtle imprints that fit neither footwear nor wildlife, tatters of cloth caught on brambles. I kept revisiting how serenely that individual had breached the forbidden zone, as though it were routine. Their steps lacked haste, no drive to seek shelter from the frost. That particular trait gnawed at me above all else. Such harsh weather typically demands quick choices, yet they proceeded deliberately, with evident purpose. At last, intrigue drove me to inquire discreetly. In a modest community eatery, I caught snippets from a pair of elderly gentlemen discussing the law enforcement stir. Their voices were low, touching on burglaries, illicit waste disposal, and crude hideouts buried far within the thicket. One chuckled about folks concealing themselves in spots no one cared to probe. I lingered at my table, absently swirling my now lukewarm brew, struck by how near that concealed territory lay to my everyday habits. I reflected on how effortlessly my gaze had tracked the intruder's route, how instinctive it seemed to observe them stray from security. It disturbed me to concede how readily I might have ventured beyond those placards too. Rest eluded me for some nights thereafter. Each snap beyond the glass rang louder. Every breeze seemed purposeful. I began securing the lock sooner than before and abandoned the path entirely. On one later outing nearer to the village, I noticed a length of cord partially sunk in the drifts, matching the one guarding the no-go section. I couldn't confirm it was identical, but its presence there triggered a shiver. It prompted questions about overlooked signals in the past, about unwitting brushes with perils lurking beyond notice. The notion that threats arrive unheralded settled over me like a burden. In time, the official patrols withdrew and normalcy returned. We received nothing more than nebulous assurances from authorities. Even so, that frosty outing lingered, reframing my view of everyday locales. I came to see that nearness breeds no guarantees, and habits can obscure subtle alerts. To this day, long afterward, I shun forested detours in the chillier seasons. I remain ignorant of that person's identity or motive, and perhaps always will. But observing them sparked an enduring transformation within me, a quiet pivot to wariness that endures. The thaw of spring eventually blurred winter's harsh outlines, yet it couldn't wipe away the episode. I recall the initial full melt, when the earth softened to slush and unveiled long-buried secrets. From the roadside, I discerned churned spots on the woodland floor in the sealed-off part, shadowy stains where foot traffic had plainly crisscrossed. It rendered the matter tangible, shifting from an eerie echo to a dodged peril. I grasped the fragility separating habit from hazard, just a single deviation from the known way. Soon enough, a brief piece surfaced on a community news page. The article discussed detentions linked to unlawful operations in the woods, involving pilfered goods and folks exploiting the terrain to evade detection. It stayed ambiguous and restrained, likely to prevent alarm, yet revealed sufficient details to send a chill through me. They featured an image snapped from the woodland's fringe, depicting litter and a slim trail that matched precisely the path I'd spotted earlier that day. I gazed at the picture for ages, following its course with my fingertip. It suddenly dawned on me that the figure I'd tracked visually wasn't disoriented or reckless. They'd been heading straight to their destination. That insight stirred a surprising blend of ease and apprehension. Ease because I hadn't shouted, hadn't pursued, hadn't attempted to assist. Apprehension since it implied I'd unwittingly neared something intentional and concealed. I began recounting the tale discreetly to a handful of pals, presenting it as an odd fluke instead of something intense. The majority dismissed it, noting such occurrences are commonplace. But a few fell silent, particularly those who frequented paths close to their residences. It was disturbing to witness that identical flicker of realization transfer to them, that brief hesitation in their replies. Ultimately, the fix was straightforward and sensible. I abandoned that path entirely and altered my habits. I opted for more crowded paths, spots with clear views and crowds nearby. The woods remain as they are, unaltered, and I occasionally drive by en route to my job. But the pull is gone now. That one chilly trek showed me how deceptive the familiar can be, and that not all serene spots are vacant. I'll never know the outcome if I'd advanced a bit further that afternoon. The key is that I held back, and that decision continues to seem wise. By that time, my habit was working from home amid a brutal winter, particularly as tasks accumulated and daylight faded quicker. In that phase of my existence, I resided solo in a compact two-level home, aiming to cut costs and stay low-key. Flurries had come intermittently for several days, the sort that dampens all outdoor sounds and isolates the home from everything else. That night, my work pinned me to my workstation, headphones secured, handling conversations and documents as the radiator droned steadily. I recall a peculiar appreciation for the seclusion, as if the weather had handed me permission to vanish temporarily. The residence carried a profound quietude, more burdensome than soothing, though I pushed the notion away. I convinced myself it was merely the season's typical squeeze from every direction. Nothing about the evening stood out at first, just one more extended session indoors. The initial noise pierced my earpieces unexpectedly, something gentle and fleeting that clashed with the sounds playing. I halted the conversation, raised one ear cup, and strained to hear, anticipating the fan or plumbing. Instead, it was nearer, a subtle rub, like cloth grazing a surface. I rose and scanned the corridor, discovering it all undisturbed as before. All downstairs entrances were shut, illumination dimmed, silhouettes in their proper spots. Returning to my station, I blamed exhaustion and resumed with the headphones. Soon after, a deeper sound filtered in, resembling a deliberate, measured footfall. My concentration wavered. Yet I compelled myself to complete the immediate duty. I resisted acknowledging my growing sensitivity to each minor creak. As hours stretched, those understated disturbances persisted, invariably soft enough to spark doubt about their authenticity. At times it mimicked a hinge, creaking faintly, at others an object skimming against fixtures. Each inspection revealed a house appearing ordinary, its calm almost contrived. Toward the close of my session, I stepped away to top off my cup and saw the spare bedroom entrance ajar. I'd distinctly shut it before, due to the window's breeze causing vibrations. The lavatory portal farther along was cracked open too, positioned unlike my usual setup. Pausing there, cup in grip and overlooked, a gradual disquiet took hold within me. I toured the space, securing every entry anew, noting the snaps of the mechanisms. Settling back at my workstation, the hush rang sharper than prior. Rest evaded me post-log-out, and the dwelling seemed off in an indescribable manner. Come dawn, still unsettled, I pulled up the surveillance feed on my device, driven more by intrigue than alarm. The recording from the night prior captured faint stirrings amid my labor, umbrae wavering and portals altering angles independently. Once the spare room barrier inched ajar gradually, as if guided by a cautious hand. No distinct shape emerged, no evident intruder. Just unnatural shifts where none ought to occur. I kept looping through the video footage over and over, hunting for any sign of a break-in, a gap, or something logical. The security logs indicated every door and window stayed firmly locked throughout. Gripping my phone, it hit me that those noises I'd heard weren't just in my head. That morning, I roamed the house notepad in hand, jotting notes on precisely what the cameras recorded. The scenes matched the areas I'd inspected myself, but the sequences clashed with what I recalled. At one moment, the corridor light switched on for a second, despite me never flipping that toggle during the night. In a different segment, the storage room door nudged forward, halted, and then eased back to closed without haste. No abrupt jerks or frenzy, just deliberate slowness. That element unnerved me the most. The force behind it wasn't sloppy or unintended. It acted as if it knew the layout intimately, grasping exactly how much pressure would keep things silent. By afternoon, I reached out to my buddy Lucas to swing by, mainly to avoid stewing in solitude. We pored over the recordings on my computer, dissecting each frame, freezing and backing up until my vision blurred. He started off lighthearted, floating ideas like air currents or temperature shifts from the chill, but his voice grew serious as we progressed. He highlighted the regularity of the motions, timed to my office stretches, ceasing whenever I rose from my chair. We inspected all the windows, air ducts, and even the loft hatch. Everything pristine. The fresh snow beyond the walls bore only my tracks from dawn. Witnessing his assurance crumble only deepened the unease, turning it tangible. That evening, I dove back into work but skipped the earbuds this time. Without them, every noise rang louder, the furnace humming, the subtle creaks of settling beams. I angled my setup to overlook the passage, monitors framing the entryways. The session dragged on uneventfully, and I began to wish the prior evening's oddities were a fluke. As my shift wound down, a faint snap reverberated clearly, intentional as could be. The locked restroom door crept ajar slightly before pausing. I froze, breath shallow, observing it as one might a skittish creature ready to flee. After what seemed an eternity, it swung shut softly, the bolt settling right where it started. The following day, I summoned a security expert for a hands-on evaluation. He verified no faults, no hacks, and zero evidence of meddling. On his way out, he recommended interior motion detectors, which I had fitted right away. From then on, the anomalies vanished entirely. No creaks, no drifting panels, no on-screen stirrings. Still, tension lingered. I relocated my station to the lounge area and left inner doors ajar ever after. To date, the source of those stealthy episodes during my shifts remains a mystery. Only certainty. It seemed tuned into my presence, and once aware of my scrutiny, it stayed gone. The week wrapped in an odd hush that blanketed the home, uninvited and uneasy. Routine tasks resumed. Projects hit marks and faded, with feeds displaying just vacant spaces and reliable clocks. Yet patterns shifted involuntarily. Bulbs burned brighter into the night, and I'd pause to strain my ears before entering spaces. The new detectors sat idle throughout, a fact that ought to soothe, but instead hung like unfinished suspense. Acquaintances dismissed it as paranoia, blaming anxiety and seclusion for warped senses. But I recognized tension doesn't unlatch secured portals or bend figures in recordings. Normalcy reasserted itself too neatly. The season stretched through the freeze until the drifts thawed. unveiling the grounds pristine. No churned earth, no scrapes on the exterior. Zero clues to seize and declare the culprit. I scanned the videos once more prior to storage, compelling a steady view without skips. A rhythm emerged, faint yet reliable, focusing on that single corridor and select inner portals. Never the main entrance or rear. It evoked less a violation and more an entity threading known paths. The notion clung stubbornly. Dwellings, after all, hold memories sharper than we do. In time, pragmatism overrode the wondering. The property hit the market, and I framed the relocation around practicality and ease. Boxing belongings was like sealing an unresolved tale. On my last morning, all thresholds gaped wide. Rays pierced shadows that had lingered dim. Pacing the barren interiors, it appeared benign, downright mundane. No echoes trailed after me, no final wave, no trace of the presence that had lingered through those times. The cameras were dismantled bit by bit, and I abandoned them there with the keys resting on the surface. That quiet didn't tag along as I departed. These days, settled in a different spot and keeping to much the same schedule, the chill of winter feels less burdensome than before. Every so often I slip off my headphones to scan the air nearby. It's a routine that seems unlikely to vanish. Events like that haven't repeated themselves. Perhaps that's as near to closure as I'll ever come. Certain experiences can etch themselves in without demanding an identity or form. What lingers in my mind is simply that, in those moments, an unseen force drifted across my space without revealing itself. Once I quit ignoring it, the occurrences ended right then. It's that detail that keeps drawing my thoughts in the dead of night.